Hello everyone. Firstly, I want to congratulate you all because we already made some of our fundamentals in HTML and CSS, and we have created some general static website by your own by using VS Studio Code Editor. And in this video, we have to learn some theoretical concepts in a CSS because those are the important concepts that are by defaultly applying to our selectors and the elements in our CSS file. And in this video, I am going to teach you the what are the rules that gonna apply to our selectors and what are the priorities that should be taken for the selectors. Okay, these are all the things that we are required to learn before moving further into the topic, because these are the general things that we need to learn as a web developer. Okay, let me proceed further into the topic. Multiple selectors applying for same element. For example, we have a different types of selectors in our file. Like we have element selector, we have ID selector, we have class selector. What if all these three selectors will apply for the same element? Okay, let me take an example. Like I'm considering this general example which includes p tag. Okay, for this p element, I'm gonna apply the three selectors. Like by using this p tag, we can directly write a code for element selectors, right? By using this p tag, we can directly write a code for element selector. Okay, I'm including two attributes here within the p tag. Okay, I'm including two attributes like id attribute and class attribute. I'm giving my reference name for the id attribute as id selector, and for the class attribute, I am giving my reference name as class selector. Okay, these are the three types of selectors. This is an element selector, this is an id selector, this is an class selector. Generally, these are the attributes. These two are the attributes within the p tag. Okay, within the p opening tag, we are including the id attribute and class attribute for write a code in our CSS file as the selectors, right? Okay, for suppose I have applied some properties for this line by using p element selector, right? For example, I am applying my element selector for the p. Like if I take this thing in our CSS file, like for this p tag, I am applying element selector with some properties like color and font size. Okay, by using this element selector p, I am opening my curly braces and I have applied some properties of color and font size with some values. I am including here hexadecimal notation and with some font size 25 pixels. If I include some properties for the ID selector, okay, for example, I am including some of the additional properties within the ID selector, right? I am using the hash symbol here. By using hash symbol, I am taking the reference name. Okay, that the thing that we have given within the double quotes will be the reference name for the ID selector. By using that ID selector reference name, we are giving the selector here, right? By using hash, we are giving ID selector here. Within the curly braces, I have included some properties like color and font family. In this selector, I am giving my color as red and font family as Arial. If I have taken my properties for class attribute also, like if I consider my different properties for the class attribute also in this way, like I am using one dot symbol to make the class selector, and I am using the reference name here class selector. Within the class selector reference name, I am including my two properties like font style and color. Okay, in this parameters, I am using my font color as green and font style as italic. The question that have to arise in your mind is, we are including three selectors in a same element. In this case, which of the selector might be applied? Okay, the thing here is, we are including three selectors here. Okay, within the three selectors, which selector need to apply to our file? Okay, the question we have brought it. What are the type of selector that we need to apply for your general page? That is nothing but which selector should apply within these three selectors. And the answer for your question is all of them will apply, right? All of the selectors will apply for this p tag. Okay, for this p tag, within the p tag we have this sentence. For this sentence, we have applied this all the properties that we are given within the element selector, ID selector and the class selector. The page will use all the properties which are given within the three of the selectors, right? And if you observe carefully, we have the properties in this as color for every selector. Okay, we have a common property within the each and every selector. Within the element selector, ID selector and the class selector, we have the common property of color, and we have given some different values to our color property. Like we have given here hexadecimal notation with some different color. Here we have given red and here we have given green. The answer for your question, which selector should apply, means we have to apply all of them. All of them will apply to our page. But the question arises, another question arises here is, we have the common property within the three selectors. Like we have color properties same for every selector. But the another question is, which of the colors should apply? In that case, we need to know some priorities of the selector. Okay. To apply the selector property within your CSS file, we need to know some priorities of the selectors. Okay. By using those priorities, we will apply the properties to your element. Okay. For that case, we need to know some other declarations. Okay. In this video, I am going to add upon some other declarations to our CSS file. Like we already learned the pseudo class selector, right? By using this two dotted symbol, which is nothing but an is to symbol, or we can call it as colon. By using this colon, we are going to create one pseudo class selector. Okay. In this example, I am giving the pseudo class selector for the hover. To hover over the links. To hover over the hyperlinks, we are going to use pseudo class selector. In this example, I have taken the thing, and this is the one type of way to declare our selectors in our CSS file, right? And we have another thing like inline style. That means while learning the ways to create a CSS file into our HTML file, we have thought that we have an inline style in which we will use style attribute in your HTML file. Like if you create one p tag, within the p tag we will use some style attribute. Okay, by using this style attribute, we can give the styles within this style attribute within our HTML file. Okay, this is one way of creating CSS file. Okay, this is also one style to make our website with different property values. Okay, this is one thing that you need to keep in mind. And another thing is, which will be a new one to our topic, is universal selector. Okay, universal selector. With this universal selector, we are going to apply everything. Okay, the properties that we are giving within this universal selector by using this asterisk symbol. Okay, this is a star symbol which is called as asterisk. Okay, within the asterisk, if we give some properties to our page, that properties will gonna apply to entire page. Okay, the asterisk symbol represents the universal selector. That means it will give the properties to the everything within our web page, right? That is the thing that you need to understand within the universal selector. Okay, if I given color red, font style italic and font weight as bold, these three properties will be applied to the entire page of our web page. Okay, and we have important declaration. Okay, important declaration is done by using exclamatory mark. If you give something with exclamatory mark and if you declare as important, that whole thing will be considered as the important thing. Okay, this is one type of declaration which is having high priority. Okay, it can be applied to any of the selector. For any selector, if you give this important declaration for any selector, it will be taken as the highest priority. Okay, that means we are giving the more importance to that selector. And coming to the priorities of the selectors, within the three selectors, like we have common selectors as ID selector, class selector and the element selector. Within those three selectors, the first priority we are given to is ID selector. Okay, For the ID selector, we will give the first priority within the three selectors. Within the common three selectors, ID selector, class selector and the element selector, the first priority we are giving to this is ID selector. And if there is no ID selector, and the priority will gives to class selector or the pseudo class selector. If there is no ID selector, then the priority goes to the class selector or the pseudo class selector. The class selector and the pseudo class have the same priority. Okay, if there is no ID selector for your element, and if there is any class selector, and the priority will goes to class selector first. And if there is no class selector within your element, okay, if there is no class selector, and the priority will goes to the element selector. Okay, and the priority will goes to the element selector. But the least priority that we have given to our selectors is universal selector. Okay, the least priority that we have given in our selectors is universal selector, which takes the least priority. Okay, the thing which we are giving properties to our within the universal selector is taking the least priority rather than all selectors. Okay, within the selector we have the ID selector for the first priority. If there is an occurrence of all the selector in your element, and it takes the property values for the ID selector if there is any common occurrences between our selectors. Okay, it will include all the selectors properties, but if there is any occurrence of the common property within these within these selectors, then we will take the priority from the ID selector first. Okay, it will take the value from the ID selector. Okay, if there is no ID selector, then it takes the values from the class or the pseudo class selector. If there is no class or the pseudo class selector, then it takes the element selector. Okay, but we have seen that some of the another declarations like important declaration and in-style declaration. Okay, but before the ID selector, the highest priority we have considered is for inline style. Okay, inline style is nothing but the style attribute that we are given to our elements within the HTML file. If there is any occurrence of the inline style in our HTML page, then it takes the first priority before the ID selector. Okay, and before the inline style we have important selector. Okay, if you declare something with important declaration, like we will use some exclamatory mark, with the exclamatory mark and with I am giving the keyword as important. If you use this important declaration with any of these selectors, it takes the first priority. For example, I have said that within these three selectors, ID selector takes the first priority, right? But if I am declaring the important declaration within the element selector, okay, within the element selector, I am declaring with important declaration. Even though the ID selector have the first priority, as we have declared this element selector with important declaration, the property values that gonna apply to our page is element selector. Okay, because the thing here is, even though we are considering the ID selector as the first priority within these three selectors, if we apply any declaration with important within these any of these selector, that takes the first priority. Okay, that means here we have the declaration with important as the first priority. If we give a sequence of considerations between these, and it takes the declaration with important as the highest priority, and after that we have inline style, and after that we have ID selector, and after that we have class or pseudo class selector, and then we have preference to element selector, and the least preference that we are going to our CSS file is universal selector. This is the general way that you need to keep in mind before taking our selectors into our CSS file. Okay, and if you have the same selector, for example, if same selector will apply for the same element for multiple times, like I am taking one HTML file like, okay, within the ID selector, this is one type of selector, ID selector. Within this ID selector we have created three references. Okay, if sample 1, sample 2 and sample 3, if we have given some space between two keywords within the ID attribute, that refers to we have created three ID selectors, right? We have created here three ID selectors with the reference names sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, and here we have created three class selectors. Okay, within the class attribute we have given three names by using some space. Okay, if you give space between two keywords within a class attribute or the ID attribute, it considers that we have created that much selectors, right? Here I have used three references, test1, test2 and test3 references to create three class selectors in our CSS file. Okay, what if we create same selector for the same element for multiple times? Okay, this is one ID selector we are giving to this para, okay, by using three reference names. Okay, by using three reference names we are giving the same selector for the simple paragraph. For example, I am giving my CSS attribute like, for example, I am considering this code in our CSS file. Like for this sample one reference name, I am given my color as red. Okay, within this sample reference, I am giving my color property as red. For I am taking this sample 2. For sample 2 ID selector, I am giving my color as blue. For sample 3 ID selector, I am giving my color as red. Okay, for example, in the class attribute, I am giving my, for the test1, I am giving my font size as 22 pixels. For the test2 class attribute, I am giving the class selector for the test2. Okay, this is the test2. For this test2, I am giving the font size as 25 pixels. For the test3, I am giving my font size as 30 pixels. Please make a change here. This is the test2 and this is the test3. Okay, for these things, if I give changes with the same property but for different value, okay, these are all the different ID selectors, right, for applying for same element. Okay, these three are the ID selectors which are gonna apply to the same element here. Okay, for the same thing we are giving three different ID selectors. Okay, within the three different ID selector, which one should apply? That is the question. And here we are given three different class selectors by using test1. Here this is the test2. Please make a correction on it. And this is the test3. Okay, for these three different class selectors, we will give the same properties, right? We will giving the same properties but different values, but with different values. Okay, 22 pixel over here, 25 pixel over here, 30 pixel over here. But the question arises here is, which one of them should apply? Okay, in this case, which selector should apply? These three are the ID selectors. These three are the class selectors. If there is any coincidence between the ID selector and the class selector, we will go for ID selector first, because we have the ID selector as the highest priority between the ID and the class selector. Okay, but within the ID selector we have different attributes, like we have different selectors. For the same ID selector we have different selectors with the same properties like color. But which one should apply? And if you take an output of this file is, it will give me like this. Okay, that means within this thing we are giving the red color. That means we are giving red color, because the thing that you need to understand here is, the answer for your question is last selector in the code will apply. Okay, last selector in your code will apply to your element. Okay, I am giving my sample 1 selector as red. Okay, I am giving the sample 2 selector as blue. Okay, I am giving my sample 3 selector as red only. For this, within these three selectors, the property that have applied to our element is last element. Okay, last code that we have written in our file will apply to your element. Okay, this is the one rule that you need to keep in mind. Okay, here we have given color red for this sample 3. That means sample paragraph for multiple selectors we will be indicated with the color red. Here the output is sample paragraph for multiple colors. And if you consider class attribute, okay, within the class selector test1, test2 and test3, we have different values for the same property font size. Okay, 22 pixel, 25 pixel, 30 pixel. For the within these class selectors we have applied with this last code. That means this last selector, this last class selector will apply to our element. That means 30 pixel of font size will be applied to this line, like test paragraph for multiple selectors. For this test paragraph for multiple selectors, we will apply it with 30 pixel font size. That means you need to keep in mind that last selector in the code will apply for your element. Okay, and we will override all the previous selector properties. For example, when you created this selector sample1, okay, with the id selector sample1, we have created color with red. Okay, that means it will apply the color to the red to our element, like the sample paragraph for multiple times will be turned to the red color. Okay, and then if you created this one sample2, okay, this sample2 id selector, and given the color as blue, that means we are overriding the color of the red which will be included in the first id selector. Okay, that red color will be overridden by using blue color here. Okay, that red color will be crossover and overridden with blue color. That means this entire thing will turn to blue color. And if I include this another id attribute, I am including another id selector here. I am again overriding that blue color with the red color. Okay, I am overriding this color blue with color red by using the another attribute, another id selector. By using this another id selector, we are overriding the blue color with red color by using the same color property, and we are changing the property value here. Okay, property keyword here. That means here you need to keep in mind that if there is any case when we apply the same selector for the same element for the multiple times, the last selector in the code will apply for that element and it overrides all the previous selector properties. This is the thing that you need to keep in mind about the rules and the priorities of our selectors. Okay, these are all the general rules that are applied to your selectors in our CSS file. I think we have done a lot of things and we will catch up in the next video. Thank you.